Welcome to the Capital News. I am your host, Alex Karitis. Today is November 12th, 2019. Thank you so much for joining me. The title of today's podcast is Positive Economy, Negative Rates. I think you know what I'm talking about. Donald Trump gave his speech this afternoon before the Economic Club of New York. I was able to watch and listen to the entirety of this speech. Not his best, not his worst. Where I applaud this president, and I have done so throughout the entirety of this podcast since we've been on the air since February, he is a cheerleader for the United States of America. I have to give the president credit for that. Now, he goes a little over the top for my liking. Some people may really appreciate that, though. They might like that style. I would rather his speeches of this type to be more rooted in truth and honesty as opposed to a lot of exaggeration and hyperbole. That would suit me better. I guess I'm a rare bird, a rare breed around here. Most people would rather just hear the hype and the big talk and just, root and holler for the president. We're making America great again. These are the best numbers ever. This is the greatest economy ever. Of course, that's not true. And so today we're going to walk through some of this. One of the things that really upset me during this speech, and of course it did upset me, you're not going to be surprised why, is because the president is once again aggressively calling out the Federal Reserve and saying we need negative interest rates here in the United States. We need to follow Europe. And once again, ironically, at the end of this speech, he says, as long as I am the president of the United States, this will not be a socialist nation. And of course, the room erupted in applause because that hits a lot of buzzwords. Now, of course, you follow this podcast or you have read our book, The Cynic's Guide to Investing. You understand that this is not a free market capitalistic system that is in place here in the United States. It can't be, with the amount of taxes, the amount of regulation, the amount of interference and involvement from government at all levels, especially the federal government. Capital does not come into existence from a printing press, and we have a Federal Reserve that is once again putting the pedal to the metal. And this is true of other central banks around the world. But if he wants to say this isn't a socialist nation, or it will never be, too late, by the way, then why are you calling for the United States to follow Europe, which has a lot of socialistic tendencies, especially the European Central Bank, the ECB, especially the European Union bureaucracy? You can't have it both ways. Then he goes out, and of course, when he said this, he got real, tough guy-ish, if you will, and some people started applauding because he was making the argument, well, the United States should have the lowest rates. He's making the argument, you understand what negative rates are, don't you? We're going to get paid money instead of the other way around. We're going to get paid money. Give me that money, he says. Give me some of that money. I want some of that money. Clearly not understanding what negative rates implies or what it actually means. Or maybe he does and he doesn't care. Both scenarios is wrong. Both scenarios are unacceptable as far as I'm concerned. Because later in the speech, he wants to tout the stock market. He wants to tout 401ks and all that performance since he's been elected. Of course, you don't count from January 20th with Donald Trump. You count on Election Day, November 8th or whatever it was in 2016. That's when you start to count the stock market gains. That's when all of the economic numbers are supposed to be started. At least anything that looks positive. Whatever makes Donald look better is where you start the count. But when he was making this argument for negative rates, some people started to applaud. And Donald Trump made the statement, look, the smart people are applauding. And I said, oh, hell no. The stupid people are applauding. Actually, I said much worse than that, but I keep this family friendly as much as I can. Because that's when it really got me red-faced. Because I'm getting sick and tired of this talk of everything's great on the one hand, and then somehow we need negative rates. And he says, we're the best economy ever, so we should have the lowest rates possible here in the United States. Clearly, Donald Trump does not understand debt, even though he claims to be the king of debt. We have $23 trillion as a national debt right now. $23 trillion. Over $100 trillion in unfunded liabilities. Donald, that means there's a little bit of risk involved, giving Uncle Sam some money. And what doesn't he understand about negative interest rates? He understands that if we have negative interest rates at the government level, that people who buy Uncle Sam's debt are not going to receive a coupon. They're going to be paying Uncle Sam the privilege to lend to Uncle Sam. That doesn't work. That's not supposed to happen nor exist in a free market capitalistic system. But of course, we don't have a free market capitalistic system, so that's why there are negative rates in Europe, in Japan. That's why there are real negative interest rates here in the United States. And if Donald Trump gets his way, there will be nominal negative interest rates in this country as well. So for those of you who are savers, for those of you who are in retirement or are near retirement, or are hesitant as to what the stock market is doing because you're supposed to buy low, sell high, the market is making all-time highs. So how confident are you that there's going to be a melt-up or this thing's just going to steadily increase over the time as we make our way further and further along this business cycle, which we're going to talk about a little bit because we're going to counteract what Donald Trump was saying with some of his statistics. How positive are you? How much risk tolerance do you want to take right now? Do you want to continue with this? Because if you want to be a little bit less gun-shy, if you want to sort of hedge some of the risk and go into what's considered a risk-free asset or a safe haven, i.e. Uncle Sam's debt, right now you are getting a coupon. But if you have negative interest rates, you're going to have to pay Uncle Sam. That work for you? Don't you want to earn a rate of interest? Or would you rather pay Uncle Sam? Because haven't you done that enough already for the entirety of your working career? I mean, it's not enough that you're taxed to death. It's not enough that there's regulations out the wazoo. Now, of course, again, kudos to the Trump administration for slashing a lot of regulations. There's no question that the tax cuts and his regulatory policy of pretty much cutting 2 regulations for every one that's created, and he's touting that it's more of a ratio of 9-1 for every regulation that is brought into existence. His administration cuts 9 that are already in existence. So that's a pretty good ratio if that's what the truth is. That's a good thing. And there's no question that policy of deregulation and the tax cuts have kicked out a recession, have pushed us out further in this record-breaking expansion of the business cycle. There's no question about that. And then with the Federal Reserve continuing to put the pedal to the metal again, it's continuing to push this further out. It's kicking the can further and further down the road. These aren't solutions, by the way, because the tax cut came along without any cutting to federal spending. So now you have trillion-dollar deficits. And given the agreement between Donald Trump, which he brags about, and the Democrats, we're going to have trillion-dollar deficits as far as the eye can see. You do not have a positive, strong, best economy ever with trillion-dollar deficits. Doesn't work that way. And that's why the market, at least so far, does not want to say to Uncle Sam, yeah, you know what, we're going to pay you so that we can have the privilege of lending you money. It's not how it's supposed to work. And believe me, folks, this is why their financial system is under a lot of stress. This is why the European banking system has never recovered from the great financial crisis. It's just nowhere to be seen. You even have bankers on Wall Street say, oh, no, we can't have negative rates here because they know how detrimental they are to the system. Now, there's nobody on this face of this earth that wants this financial system turned upside down. But there is an orderly way to do it. There might not be no other individual on the face of this planet that wants the Federal Reserve abolished and the income tax abolished more than me. But there are orderly ways to do it. You don't act like a bull in a china shop. You especially don't do it by just tweeting about it or making some very off-the-cuff remarks at a speech. You're the President of the United States. If you speak, people are going to listen. Do an educational tour. Educate the public on what the Federal Reserve does, because we are in agreement that they're troublemakers. But I'm not calling for negative interest rates, and I'm not calling for quantitative easing because I understand the destructiveness of those policies. And I thought Citizen Trump did. I thought candidate Donald Trump did, because he was calling them out. They're creating bubbles. This is a fake economy. Of course, that's when it was Obama and Biden. Now he's president. Give me that money. Give me that money. And you know who he's talking about. He's talking about your money. Because it's your 401k that has bonds. It's your retirement account that has bonds. It's your annuity and the insurance companies that are investing in bonds. Give me that money. He sounds a lot like Christine Lagarde. Remember that podcast a few days ago? Jobs versus savings. Better to have a job than savings. Of course it is. They're coming for your savings. And I am telling you, you are going to end up with neither. Because that's how the government, that's how the central banks work. And why are those our only two options? Think about that too. During his speech, Donald Trump made a couple other claims. One was highly shocking to me. I didn't know this. Maybe you folks did. But his daughter, Ivanka Trump, according to President Trump, Ivanka Trump has created, wait for this, 14 million jobs. I'm not making this up. 14 million jobs have been created by his daughter, Ivanka Trump. That's amazing. It's also not true. She wanted to create 500,000 jobs. That was her goal. But no, under promise, over deliver much. 500,000, 14 million, unbelievable. And it is unbelievable because it ain't true. He also made mention to median household income being up, a few $100s over the entirety of the 8 years of the George W. Bush tenure, a few $100s over the entirety of the Obama tenure. But under the first couple years of Donald Trump, median household income has increased $7,000. This, too, simply cannot be true. It just cannot be true. You have to just do the math on this, and it's not true. It doesn't work out. Ask yourself, do you have $7,000 more in your pocket? I don't think so. Highly unlikely, because there's other things that you can look at as a proxy to see if the average consumer has an additional $7,000 in his pocket, then why are there so many people working 2 or 3 jobs? Interesting question. Why hasn't consumer spending been shooting off to the moon? I mean, if they got all this money, then we should have an increase in consumer spending that's just off the charts. We're not seeing that. We're also not seeing any significant increase in the savings rate. If you got more money, maybe you're going to start saving it. We're not seeing any sharp increase that would be consistent with this type of increase that the president is claiming in median household income. You would also perhaps see a larger deleveraging. Well, if you got extra cash, maybe you're going to start paying off some debts. We're not seeing these things or any combination thereof that would warrant and add up to the amount that this would add up to. It's arithmetic. It just does not work. Now, unless, of course, you might take into consideration, well, maybe household size has increased. Maybe there's more millennials living at home. Maybe there's older generations moving back in with their children who are, of course, in their 40s or 50s perhaps. But maybe they're still making some money and that's getting counted. This is funny stuff to me. Now, there's no question that median household income has risen under Donald Trump. That I believe. But again, this goes to the end or the nearing of the end of the business cycle. You're starting to peak. We've done presentations on this on Capital Economics because we're going to talk about some employment data, some tax revenue data, and some trade deficits as well. Because all of these things were discussed by President Trump this afternoon in his speech before the Economic Club of New York. You have wages going up, no doubt about it. That's what you're likely going to see at the end of an expansion. This is business cycle stuff. This is what we talk about on this podcast. That's what those capital economics presentations are primarily all about, understanding the business cycle and where we are. The analogy I like to use, if you climb Mount Everest, you're at the top. The only way you go from there is down. You hit the peak of the expansion, you start to go down. That downward slope, that's called a recession. Doesn't mean it's going to be the end of the world. Doesn't mean it's going to be worse than 08, 09. I mean, I think it's going to be. That's my personal opinion, because we have too much debt at the household consumer level, at the corporate level, at the government level, local, state, federal. And you have the central banks around the world that are out of control. So who's going to get bailed out? It was bad a decade ago. But that was more siloed off. It was just in a few corners. Of course, it was systemic. But yeah, we haven't seen something like that in 80 years. We got some tools. Maybe we can try something. Quantitative easing, low interest rates. Maybe we'll give that a try. It's something new. People bought into it. Okay. Now it's only been 10 years on. It's too fresh in the memory. So it's not going to work. Federal Reserve's out of ammunition, but they're going to keep shooting. It's jawboning, it's a shell game, it's a con game. And Donald Trump is somewhat in on it because he keeps talking everything up. Not because the fundamentals are strong, because they're not. But because there's a lot of money printing going on, and it has to go somewhere. So if you want to hang your hat on money printing and counterfeit, be my guest. I don't do that here at the Capital News. U.S.-China was obviously talked about. I'm almost speechless. I'm not surprised, though. Tariffs will go up significantly, according to Donald Trump, if we do not reach a phase one trade deal. Now, we don't know the specifics of anything because he doesn't give specifics, ever, other than the fact I got a piece of paper here and we're going to sign it. Of course, that was a month ago. Nothing has been signed. You got the propaganda going back and forth between China and the United States. Donald Trump wants to play the strongman, which he has been doing. President Xi also wants to play the strongman. So they're not going to come to an agreement. And the further along we go, China's not going to acquiesce. They're just not going to do it. Because why would they give the president a quote-unquote win in 2020? It just doesn't make sense. They might give him a phase one, but they're not going to give him anything else. And I don't even know what a phase one deal is going to be, because we've been lied to so many times on so many different occasions. You even have Larry Kudlow going back out there. I really feel bad for Larry. I like Larry Kudlow. I know I joke about him on this podcast from time to time, but I like Larry Kudlow. I don't agree with him on a whole host of issues, but I like him. I used to watch his show on CNBC, that type of stuff. The man, I think, is trying his hardest to be a straight shooter, because he knows that this president is somebody who speaks off the cuff, who exaggerates, who lies, who doesn't care about it either. But Larry Kudlow, he's trying to salvage some of his integrity, some of his reputation. And so when he's asked these questions, which he was this afternoon, about details surrounding U.S.-China trade talks and what the president is talking about by increasing significantly tariffs, he can't give him an answer. He can't give him an answer. He just says, well, we're close. We're close to getting a deal. No, we're not close. We were told a month ago we have one. Just got to iron out some very small details, and we have to have a signing ceremony. That's all. Now, we've been told this many times before, too. So we're just getting closer and closer, which I think it means we're getting further and further. Because, again, why would the Chinese give Donald Trump a political win with a deal? It's not going to happen. And furthermore, and we're going to talk about this, too, if we have time after I get through some of this other data, you still have the Hong Kong protests taking place. And again, these typically occur on the weekends. Nope, they've been continuing on the weekends, but also on Monday and today, Tuesday, and they are continuing right now on Wednesday. And what we have right now in the Asian markets, because they're trading right now as we're doing this podcast, the Japanese markets are down 1%. Chinese markets are down about a third. We have the South Korean market down almost 1%. Singapore is down about 0.7%, and Hong Kong is down an additional 2%, down nearly 600 points on the trading session. So this is not good. Of course, anything could turn around, but people are starting to understand that this trade deal is further and further apart. People are starting to understand that these geopolitical risks, which I have been talking about here a little bit more aggressively over the past few days, that this is not transitory, people. This is history in the making. In the markets, they've been putting this aside. These are just weekend protests. People are upset. They don't want the interference from China, the mainland, into Hong Kong. They don't like some of these extradition bills, blah, 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 blah. You know, these young people, they'll get over it. Well, apparently not so, because they're picking up the tempo. And now it's starting to get a little bit more violent, which is not a good thing, but that's what's happening. The individual who was shot over this weekend, the other individual who was caught on fire, literally was caught on fire this weekend. Not good at all. And now these protesters are starting to protest during the week, shutting down commerce. You even have some of the major banks announcing, I just saw on Bloomberg, telling their employees, your safety is top priority. You don't have to come into work. If there's meetings, reschedule the meetings. It's no big deal. Your safety is priority. Do what you have to do. So it's shutting down Hong Kong. And Hong Kong is a financial gateway for China. Okay? Hong Kong has one of the most bubblicious, frothy real estate markets in the world. Okay? If there isn't commerce taking place, no cash, no sale. Get what I'm saying? You got no cash, you can't pay the rent. So out the door you went. That's what's going to happen. And this is going to be a trickle-down effect. And I said this yesterday. The further along this goes, Mainland China, President Xi, the hawks, the hardliners, and the Chinese Communist Party are going to say, send in the troops, send in the military, send in the police force, and stop this once and for all. All hell will break loose. There is no way then there could ever be, at least not until that would get cleared up and for some time thereafter, a trade deal between the United States and China. We already have Congress who are passing bills denouncing what's going on over there, trying to stand up for Hong Kong, trying to push away China. Okay? China, like we said, everything is connected, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you're understanding this by following this podcast. The further along this goes, the weaker this will make the Chinese Communist Party look. The weaker this will make President Xi look. The longer this goes on in Hong Kong, the higher the probability that this will embolden people in Taiwan, not necessarily to protest, but to give them a little bit more muscle, politically speaking, from some of their politicians, to also say, don't mess with us either, China, because we know you think that Taiwan is in your backyard and is part of China as well. We're not part of China. We want nothing to do with you. Not going to happen. Okay, we'll trade with you, this, that, and the other, but we are not your serfdom, nothing like that. Now, what could that translate into? That might translate into some rebels taking root in China. There's no way they're going to tolerate that. So this thing can spiral out of control very quickly. Now, to the credit of everybody, they have allowed these protesters to do what they're doing in Hong Kong now for 6 months. Now it's starting to get violent, but China has not intervened. Of course, I'm sure they have some actors meddling in there, but they have not intervened from a police standpoint or from a military standpoint to really quash this thing and really put it down. Time will tell what happens, but this is not transitory. This is history in the making. So Donald Trump wants to continue to say, no, look, we've been ripped off by China for years. Our leadership here in the United States were a bunch of fools, a bunch of idiots. I don't blame China. They got away with it. They got to do what they got to do. But guess what? We're not doing it anymore. So again, here comes this strongman rhetoric coming from Donald Trump, which we said was likely going to play because that plays well with his base. It also plays well with a lot of blue-collar Democrats in the Rust Belt who crossed the line, who voted for Obama, who may never have voted Republican ever, but they crossed the line in 2016 and voted for Donald Trump because the trade narrative works. It resonates with blue-collar America. It does. Now, whether it's justified or not to the degree that it exists, it's irrelevant. People are irrational. We can talk about all the facts like we do here all the day. It makes no difference. The stock market continues to rally. People don't care. They show up to the rallies. They believe the hype. They believe the exaggerations. They believe the outright lies because they like the way it makes them feel. We're emotional beings. As much as we should, play more to our logical side, we don't. What differentiates us from the rest of the animal kingdom, if you will, is supposed to be our logic and our wit. We still got a long way to go. We're still very highly emotional. And sometimes that's a good thing, but most of the time, if it's not rooted in some type of logic with it, you're asking for problems. And I think, we're past the point of no return on many fronts, not only here in the United States, but we're seeing it around the rest of the world. So we're not going to have a deal unless it's better for the United States than it is for China. You think China's going to get on board with that? I mean, he's kind of telling you this ain't going to happen. But he loves the market manipulation aspect of this whole thing, so he's going to continue to jerk everybody around, which is what he's been doing. It's been his MO for the past 2 years. It's not going to stop. It's not going to stop unless he really comes down, this Hong Kong thing gets out of control, and then he has to walk back from it, or something else transpires and he has to walk back from it, or he's just going to say, look, I'm the tough guy. China doesn't want to move because they're hoping that one of the Democrats gets in. That's a great argument to make because Donald Trump is again starting to position himself to lay the blame at everybody else. That's why he was ranting about the Federal Reserve today. They didn't cut rates fast enough. We should be in negative territory. Quantitative easing. All this stuff again. The stock market would be up another 20, 25% if they had not tightened. He can make these arguments because how are you going to prove it otherwise? I mean, we did have a 20% correction, if you will, or collapse, however you want to phrase it, in the fourth quarter of 2018. So you could say, well, absent that, maybe we would be up another 20%. See how convenient this can be for him to say these things? You'd be that much better off, but for the Federal Reserve, if they would have listened to me, we'd be much better off. So he's going to take all of the congratulations, pat himself on the back, Take anything that looks good, it's going to be his responsibility, his doing. Anything that's bad, it's going to be the Democrats with this impeachment, with the investigation. It's going to be China not wanting to play ball, and it's going to be the Federal Reserve. Exactly what we have been saying since February. This goes right back to his State of the Union this year. The only thing that can derail this economy and the stock market are these endless investigations, endless wars, and now he's tacking on these other things with the Federal Reserve in China. Well, get ready, folks, because he is going to start blaming people if and when this economy and or stock market turns south, which it will, because you don't just always go up. It's a healthy thing to come down. Some of the employment data he wants to talk about being the jobs, president, this, that, and the other. Now, his record isn't as good as Ivanka's. She created 14 million jobs. He hasn't done that much. So just some of the statistics here. And this, again, goes back to what I've been saying here for months. Don't take ownership of the economy. Don't take ownership of the stock market. Because now I don't know which Democratic contender is going to be smart enough to do this. I don't think Bernie Sanders is. I don't think Elizabeth Warren is. And all the other kookanuts are, down the line aren't going to get it. Maybe Joe Biden will. Maybe Michael Bloomberg will if he gets into it. I mean, Joe Biden should definitely have this covered because what I'm about to talk about are some data points under his tenure with Obama and Biden. So Donald Trump wants to say that all of this great stuff happened under him. Joe Biden can easily come out and say, Donald, I have some facts and figures for you. When you came into office, unemployment was at 4.7%. It's now at 3.6%. So despite all of these fantastic job gains that you want to talk about and hype up, the unemployment rate only fell by 1%. By 1%. And that's going back to Election Day. 4.7, we're now at 3.6. So it went down 1%. Joe Biden, on the other hand, he could say, well, when we came into office in January of 2009, unemployment was at 7.8. You have to understand, folks, especially if you followed our capital economics, unemployment is a lagging indicator. It's going to increase as you make your way through the recession. So they came in, that being Obama and Biden, unemployment was at 7.8%. It increases through 2009 and goes up to about 10%. Okay? So it peaks at 10%. During that tenure, it comes down from 10% all the way down to 4.7. So it came down 5 points. He can say 5 points coming down is greater than 1 point coming down, Donald. We did more than you did. And we came into an economy that was the worst in generations. You see how convincing this argument can be? And I'm barely looking at anything. He can also say, if you want to do apples to apples comparison, he can say, okay, Donald, let's do an apples to apples comparison here with the number of jobs that have been created, okay? Under the last 4 years of the Obama-Biden administration, there were more jobs created on a monthly basis than there were during the first 4 years of the Trump-Pence administration. Look it up. Those are the numbers. And he can say, this number, Donald, is bigger than your number. And he would be telling the truth. See how easy this is? And this is nothing. This is nothing. So you want to take ownership of the stock market, you got to take ownership, or the economy, you got to take ownership of these numbers. It's not good. And Biden can simply say, look, all you've done is continued on with the trajectory that we were going down. Unemployment was coming down. Wages were increasing. This is the business cycle, folks. I try to hammer this into you. It makes no difference who's in the White House. What they can do is maybe, hasten a recovery by stupid policy, or they can kick it out down the road, which could also be stupid policy. And in this case, it pretty much is, because you have the tax cuts, which I'm all for, but you didn't cut spending. And so you reached into, put money in my left pocket just to take it out of my right. Makes no sense whatsoever, and that's why we have trillion-dollar deficits, and we're going to have some for the foreseeable future, especially if and when we enter recession. Tax revenue, Donald Trump wants to continue to tout tax revenue. It's up. It's fantastic. Well, if it's up and fantastic, then why do we have a trillion-dollar deficit? Interesting question. All this talk about all the trade wars and everything that's so fantastic. Why do we have some of the largest trade deficits ever in the history of this country? How is that winning? Wants to continue to talk about the farmers and that China is paying all of these tariffs, and we're using that tariff money to offset what the farmers are losing, and we're bailing out the farmers. Again, not true with respect to China paying the tariffs. You're paying the tariffs. We are paying the tariffs. That's how it works. Okay? Can China do some offsetting things with their currency? Yes, they can. Did they do it to the degree to offset them 1-to-1? No, they did not. So guess who's picking up the slack? We are. And farmers are suffering the consequences of this. We now have Dean Foods filing for bankruptcy. The dairy farm manufacturer, if you will, is filing for bankruptcy. So this is not good. This is not good. This is not winning. This is not good for particularly the Midwest. But, farming is big in many sections of this country. But particularly hardest hit is the Midwest. And Donald Trump needs that voting bloc to win in 2020. He needs them to come back to him. Those blue-collar Democrats who crossed the line, if you will, to vote for him, to give him a chance. If there's some of the farmers that lost their jobs or their neighbors or their family, he's going to have a hard time convincing them that that's winning. So it's going to be a very interesting race. Very interesting race. And then this takes us to the last part of today's podcast. Lastly, I should say, before we get to the last thing, recall Jay Powell, chairman of the Federal Reserve, is going to be testifying this week as well. We'll keep you updated on that. Of course, he's going to say everything is great when it isn't. But lastly, public hearings set to begin in the impeachment inquiry. They are starting tomorrow, I believe at 10 a.m. It'll be on all of the major networks. I'm sure of it. Hopefully, the questions are not theatrical. This isn't a circus. Hopefully, it is conducted in a manner that was sort of the manner in which it was conducted behind closed doors. That is to say that you have lawyers for the majority party and lawyers for the minority party asking the majority of the questions to Bill Taylor and George Kent tomorrow and Marie Yovanovitch on Friday, and everybody coming down the trough. And as few questions as possible from the Republicans and Democrats. I don't necessarily like saying that, but given the divisiveness of this country, I want this thing to be as professional and bipartisan as possible. And if you start allowing Adam Schiff and Devin Nunes and other big names on both sides of the aisle asking questions, it's going to turn into a circus. It's bad enough as it is. So hopefully, for the sake of professionalism and as much semblance of bipartisanship as we can get, allow these attorneys from the majority side and from the minority side, that being the Democrats and the Republican side respectively, allow them to ask their questions and allow the American public to hear the questions, to hear the answers, and to make a judgment. Does this rise to an impeachable offense? Should the president be impeached? Should he be removed? Because now it's really going to come down to a question of credibility. Are we going to believe these witnesses over Donald Trump and some of his supporters in the Republican Party? That's what it's going to come down to. And we're now in the court of public opinion. Donald Trump is continuing to say, read the transcript. It's a perfect call. Apparently, he thinks if you can repeat the same thing over and over again, eventually it's going to come true. Maybe it works. I mean, it is an old propaganda trick, so perhaps there is some validity to it. It doesn't work with me, but perhaps it does work with many Americans. Maybe you're one of them. I would just ask that everybody keep an open mind and let the facts fall where they may. If anything happens, if the Democrats get implicated in this, investigate them and lock them up. If the Trumps get implicated in all of this, lock them up too. This country has to seek truth and justice and the rule of law above all of this hyper bipartisanship. Otherwise, this republic is doomed to fail. And just because he's your guy, you got to put that to the side. Because if that's what you believe, that it's your guy, I voted for him, he can get away with it, you're not a part of the solution. You're a part of the problem. Stay diversified, stay vigilant, and stay with the Capital News. I am Alex Kreitis. Godspeed.